She woke up before dawn as she had done every morning for years, the faint light of the city just beginning to seep through the blinds of her small apartment. The alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but her body had grown used to this rhythm, trained by necessity and responsibility. She rubbed her eyes, stretched her stiff muscles, and listened to the soft breathing of her young son, still curled up under a worn blanket on the other side of the room. He was only 6, but he had the kind of innocence and hope that reminded her why every sacrifice mattered. Making breakfast was a quiet affair. She heated up oatmeal for him and poured herself a small cup of coffee, black and strong, knowing it would keep her going through the long hours ahead. She sometimes skipped eating herself, making sure he had enough on his plate, and often carried a small granola bar in her bag to sneak in when she had a free moment at work. There were days when it felt like survival alone consumed every ounce of energy she had, but she told herself it was worth it. Every single day. After breakfast, she got her son ready for school, tying his shoelaces and smoothing his hair, a small ritual that made her feel like she was holding some control over a chaotic life. She kissed his forehead and sent him off to catch the school bus, watching him walk down the street with his little backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Once he disappeared around the corner, she felt a pang of worry like every mother did, even as she tried to push it aside and focus on her own day. Her main job was at a small diner, one of those places where regulars knew your name, your order, and sometimes even your story. She liked it there mostly. The people were kind enough, and the work, though exhausting, was honest. She spent long hours on her feet, taking orders, serving food, washing dishes, and keeping a smile on her face even when her muscles screamed for relief. Some days were better than others, but she always gave everything she had because she knew she didn't have a choice. Money was always tight: rent, bills, food, and the constant little expenses that kept life moving forward. There were nights she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, counting every penny in her head, wondering if she would have enough to buy school supplies or new shoes for her son, or if she would just make do with what they had. She had learned to stretch every dollar, to make it last longer than it seemed possible. Some days, she even found herself at the local food bank or asking neighbors for help, swallowing pride just to make sure her son didn't go without. One evening, after a particularly long shift, she left the diner as the sky was turning shades of deep purple and orange. She walked the familiar streets toward her apartment, her worn shoes making soft tapping sounds on the pavement. Her bag weighed heavily on her shoulder, filled with leftovers she had packed for herself and her son. The air was cool, the kind that hinted at the coming winter, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her. As she turned a corner near a small, closed convenience store, she noticed a group of men sitting on the curb. At first, she thought they were just another group of street kids, but as she got closer, she realized they were older, rough-looking men, dressed in leather jackets with patches she didn't recognize at first. They had tattoos peeking from under their sleeves and rings on their fingers, and they sat in a quiet, almost solemn way, staring at the empty streets. Her heart skipped a beat. There was something intimidating about them, a presence that made her stomach tighten. She had heard stories about people like this, men who belonged to biker gangs who lived by rules she could barely imagine. Her first instinct was to cross the street, to put distance between herself and them. But as she walked past, something in their faces caught her attention, something unexpected: hunger. It was written on their faces in a way that needed no explanation. Their eyes were tired, their hands resting on their knees as if the weight of the day or life itself had pressed down on them. She felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of fear and compassion. These were people the world had labeled as dangerous, people she was supposed to avoid, but here they were, just human beings in need of a small kindness. She paused, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. For a moment she considered walking on, ignoring them, telling herself it wasn't her responsibility. But then she remembered the mornings when she had little to eat, when a simple meal had made all the difference. She thought of her son, of the way he had smiled at breakfast, and she made a decision. "Hey," she said softly, her voice careful, almost trembling. "I'd have some sandwiches." "You guys want one?" The men looked up at her, surprised. One of them raised an eyebrow, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips as if to say, "Are you serious?" But he didn't speak. They all stayed quiet, their eyes watching her, wary, unsure. She knelt down slightly, holding out the bag with the sandwiches. I'm just offering. No tricks, no problem if you don't want them. Slowly, one of the men reached out and took a sandwich. Another followed. Then the others. They ate quietly, carefully, as if savoring not just the food but the act itself. The proof that someone in the world still cared enough to reach out without judgment. She stood there for a few moments watching them, her heart beating fast, unsure if she should feel scared or proud. After a while, they looked up at her and she could see gratitude in their eyes, something real and human, unspoken yet understood. She nodded to them and turned to leave, walking back down the street toward her apartment. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear but from the strange rush of emotion that came with doing something brave and kind at the same time. The next day at work, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Whispers and glances followed her as she moved through the diner. One of her coworkers, someone she barely knew well, approached her during a quiet moment. "Hey, did you give food to those bikers last night?" She froze, unsure how to respond. I just, they were hungry," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Her coworker nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "You know the boss heard about it. People are talking. You might get in trouble." Her stomach sank. She tried to shrug it off, thinking it was just gossip, but the unease stayed with her. That afternoon, she was called into the manager's office. He was a man who usually smiled easily, but now his face was stern and the warmth was gone. "We heard what happened last night," he said, his voice low and serious. "We can't have employees associating with certain individuals. It's bad for business. I'm sorry, but we have to let you go." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She stared at him, unable to speak at first. Her mind raced. How would she pay rent? How would she feed her son? The fear and panic were immediate and overwhelming, but underneath it all, a strange sense of clarity emerged. She had done the right thing. She hadn't hurt anyone. She hadn't broken any laws. She had only shown kindness, and that was something she couldn't regret. As she walked home that evening, her bag lighter and her heart heavier, she felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, sadness, but also a stubborn spark of pride. She had faced a difficult choice and acted with courage, even when it cost her everything she had at that moment. The city around her felt colder somehow, the shadows longer, but there was also a quiet sense of purpose settling in her chest. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. Money would be tight and nights would be longer. She would have to fight even harder to keep her son safe and cared for, but deep down, she also knew that one small act of humanity had reminded her of something important, that even in the darkest moments, compassion could shine through, and it could change lives in ways that weren't always obvious at first. And as she turned the corner toward her apartment building, looking up at the windows glowing with warm light from other people's lives, she made a promise to herself. She would survive. She would protect her son. And no matter how hard the world tried to punish her for doing the right thing, she would continue to act with courage and kindness, because that was the only way she could live with herself, and the only way she could truly hope for a better future. The morning after losing her job was quiet, almost too quiet. Her apartment felt emptier than usual, and even her son seemed to sense that something had changed. She tried to smile, trying to keep her voice light when she made breakfast, but it was hard. The coffee tasted bitter in her mouth, and the usual routine felt heavier, as if each small task carried the weight of the world. She sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the bills spread out in front of her. Electricity, rent, water, groceries. The numbers stared back, relentless and unforgiving. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had faced hard times before, scraped by on almost nothing. But this felt different. Losing her job wasn't just losing money, it was losing stability, the tiny sense of security that had kept her going every day. Her son came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, worried. She forced a smile, reaching out to ruffle his hair. "I'm fine, baby. Just a little tired, that's all." He didn't ask more, but she could feel his small hand squeeze hers, a silent question hanging in the air. It hurt her to see him worried, to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down even more than usual. She knew she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for him. She spent the morning looking for work, sending emails and filling out applications online. But every response was the same. No openings, not enough experience, or simply silence. She called a few temp agencies hoping for a quick opportunity, But most places wanted someone who could start immediately and work long hours, which was difficult with her son at home. By midday, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The streets were busier than the night before, people moving quickly, lost in their own lives. She passed by the corner store where she had given food to the men in leather jackets. She paused for a moment, almost expecting to see them again, but the curb was empty. She felt a strange tug in her chest, a mixture of worry and hope. Had she done the right thing? She still couldn't regret it, but she wondered what consequences might come from stepping outside the life she knew. As she walked, she noticed a few familiar faces, neighbors she had waved to, people who occasionally smiled at her in passing. She felt a flicker of courage. Maybe, just maybe, someone in the world would see her struggle and offer help. She tried not to think about the uncertainty that awaited her. The bills that wouldn't pay themselves, the looming rent due in a few weeks. Later that afternoon, she returned to her apartment with a small bag of groceries she had managed to buy with the last of her money. She put them away carefully, thinking about how to make them last through the week. Every meal needed to be planned, every portion calculated so that neither she nor her son went hungry. She felt exhausted both physically and mentally, but she refused to let herself sit down and wallow. There was work to do, no matter how impossible it seemed. That evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, she decided to take her son for a short walk to the park. It was a small patch of green in the middle of the city, with swings that squeaked and a slide worn smooth by years of use. Her son ran ahead, laughing and calling out for her to come faster. For a moment, she let herself forget her troubles, following him with a small smile. His laughter was contagious, and she felt a rare lightness in her chest. But as they walked back toward their street, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. The same group of men from the night she had given them sandwiches were sitting outside the corner store again. This time they were eating something from a small bag, and when they saw her approach, they nodded in acknowledgement. Their eyes were not threatening this time, just watching her carefully. She felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. Part of her wanted to cross the street and pretend she hadn't seen them, but another part, the part that had acted without hesitation the night before, made her stop. One of the men, the one who had taken the first sandwich, spoke up. "Hey, you're the lady from yesterday," he said quietly. Her heart pounded. "Yes," she replied cautiously. I just thought you might be hungry. That's all," he nodded slowly. "We appreciate it, really." The group sat quietly, and for a moment there was a strange stillness, a pause in the world around them. She realized that what she had done hadn't been forgotten. It had mattered, at least to these men, and in a small, quiet way it gave her courage, even as she worried about the judgment of others. But reality was harsh, and it didn't take long to remind her. That night, as she scrolled through her phone, she received a call from her former manager. His tone was cold, official, and final. "We've received complaints about your behavior outside of work. We cannot allow our employees to associate with certain people. I'm afraid your position has been terminated immediately. There is no room for discussion." Her hands shook as she hung up. She sank onto the edge of the couch, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. Anger, fear, and sadness collided, leaving her exhausted and disoriented. She thought of her son, sleeping peacefully in the next room, and felt a surge of determination. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't give up. Over the next few days, she tried to find work, sending out resumes and making calls, but doors seemed to close faster than they opened. She visited local stores, small cafes, and offices, explaining her situation and asking if there were openings. The polite smiles and gentle refusals were almost worse than a flat no. They reminded her that the world could be kind on the surface but indifferent at its core. Despite this, she didn't lose hope entirely. She remembered the men she had helped, how their gratitude had felt real and human. It was a reminder that kindness, even when risky, could create small sparks of light in unexpected places. And as the days passed, she began to notice subtle signs of hope. An acquaintance offering a temporary babysitting job, a neighbor giving her a few groceries, small gestures that kept her going when it felt like everything was falling apart. One afternoon, she received an unexpected visit at her apartment. At first she froze, unsure who it could be. When she opened the door, she saw one of the men from the night she had given them food, standing there with a small bag of supplies. "We heard about your situation," he said quietly. "We thought you might need a little help." Her first reaction was disbelief. "I can't accept this," she said, shaking her head. He smiled faintly. "It's nothing big. Just some groceries. No strings attached." She felt tears prick at her eyes, not just from relief, but from the strange, unexpected humanity in the world. These were people she had once feared, judged by the world as dangerous, yet here they were, showing care in a way that few others had. She took the bag, her hands trembling, and thanked him quietly. Over the next few days, small things began to change. The men continued to help in subtle ways, leaving food on her doorstep, checking in to see if she and her son were okay, offering advice when she asked. They never overstepped, never demanded anything in return. They were simply human, flawed but capable of empathy. At the same time, she continued to look for work, determined to regain her independence. She applied for jobs she had never considered before, willing to do anything to provide stability for her son. Each rejection stung, but she refused to let it break her. She had already faced the worst fear, the possibility of leaving her child without security, and survived. That made every setback feel smaller in comparison. Late one night, as she sat at the kitchen table reviewing applications and calculating expenses, she realized something important. She had lost her job, yes, but she hadn't lost herself. She hadn't lost her courage, her empathy, or her determination. And in the quiet moments, she understood that the small acts of kindness she had given and received were more powerful than any paycheck or title. They reminded her that she was part of a larger human story, one where compassion could cross boundaries, break stereotypes, and create bonds that no hardship could sever. She looked at her sleeping son and smiled, feeling a quiet confidence grow inside her. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew she would face it with the same courage she had shown the night she handed out sandwiches. She would survive. She would fight. And she would continue to act with kindness, no matter how risky it seemed, because that was the only way to live with integrity, and the only way to teach her son the true meaning of strength. The days following the visit from the men were a strange mix of relief, gratitude, and caution. She never expected the people she had feared to become a source of support, and yet they were. Life was still far from easy. Money was tight, her apartment was small and modest, and the stress of providing for her son weighed on her. But something had shifted. She no longer felt completely alone in her struggle. There were unexpected allies, proof that even in hardship, kindness could ripple outward in surprising ways. She began to notice the little things first. One morning, she opened her door to find a bag of fresh fruits and bread sitting on her doorstep, with a simple note that read, "We hope this helps." She touched the paper, feeling the weight of their gesture, not because it solved her problems, but because someone had cared enough to notice her struggle. She realized that help didn't always come from where you expected it. Sometimes it came from the most unlikely places. At the same time, she continued her tireless search for work. She applied for dozens of positions at local stores, restaurants, offices, and even cleaning services. Each rejection stung, but she reminded herself that persistence was her only option. Giving up was not something she could afford, not for herself and certainly not for her son. Every no she received made her more determined to find a yes. And though the process was exhausting, it also sharpened her resilience. One afternoon, while walking back from a job interview, she saw the men again near the corner store. They waved, and she waved back, feeling a mixture of relief and curiosity. The leader of the group approached her cautiously. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "We wanted to know if you're doing okay. If you need anything, just groceries or a ride or something, let us know." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. The world had taught her to be wary of such offers, to assume hidden motives, but there was no pressure in his voice, no expectation. "I thank you," she said quietly. "It means a lot." "You're welcome," he said with a nod. "We don't need anything in return, just hang in there." It was a small moment, almost ordinary, yet it struck her profoundly. Here were people who society labeled as dangerous people, who had every reason to be feared, yet they were showing compassion in a simple, honest way. It reminded her that the world was rarely as black and white as it seemed. People could surprise you, and kindness could exist in the most unexpected forms. Days turned into weeks, and she began to feel a cautious sense of stability returning. The men continued their quiet support, never overstepping, never drawing attention. Sometimes they left small grocery bags at her doorstep. Sometimes they offered advice, tips for temporary work, or information about local programs that could help struggling families. She took what she could, grateful but careful not to rely entirely on them, determined to maintain her independence. One morning, she received a call from a local nonprofit organization. They had heard about her situation through a friend who volunteered there. They wanted to meet her, not for a job interview exactly, but to discuss volunteering and potential opportunities. She felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The idea of stepping into a new environment, of being judged yet again, was nerve-wracking. But she knew she had to try. At the meeting, she met a group of people dedicated to helping struggling families. They listened to her story with genuine interest, nodding and asking questions, never judging her for her past difficulties. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as a single mother who had lost her job, but as a capable, resilient woman with experience, empathy, and strength. She left the meeting with a small volunteer position and the promise of guidance and potential employment in the future. Meanwhile, her son had been noticing the changes too. He asked questions, curious and innocent, about the men she had helped and the little bags of groceries they left. "Mom, why are they helping us?" he asked one evening. She knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. "Because sometimes people see someone struggling and they want to help. Even if they seem scary or different, they can still be kind. It's what makes the world better, baby." He nodded, seeming to understand, and hugged her tightly. That moment, simple and quiet, reminded her why every risk, every act of kindness had been worth it. Her son was learning from her, absorbing the lessons of empathy, courage, and humanity. Even when life was difficult, her connection with the men also grew slowly. She began to understand bits of their stories, fragments of lives filled with mistakes, losses, and hardships. They spoke openly about the struggles that had led them to the paths they walked, and in return, she shared her own experiences, not for sympathy, but as a way to connect and remind them that they were not invisible, that their lives still had meaning beyond what society labeled them as. One day, one of the men approached her with a proposal. "There's a small food drive coming up," he said. "They need volunteers, and I thought, maybe you could help. Bring your son if you want. It's a good way to meet people and get back on your feet." She hesitated. The idea of being around a large group of people, volunteering in public, made her nervous. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and she feared judgment. But she remembered the kindness she had been shown, the way people could surprise her, and she decided to take the chance. The day of the food drive, she arrived with her son in tow. The volunteers welcomed them warmly, offering smiles and small tasks to help out. She spent the day organizing donations, packing bags of food, and handing them to families who were struggling, just like she had been. Her son helped too, learning the value of giving and sharing even in small ways. The experience was transformative. She realized that helping others, even while she was still finding her own stability, gave her a sense of purpose and control that she had been missing. It reminded her that life was not only about surviving, but also about connecting, contributing, and leaving small marks of compassion in the world. By the end of the day, she felt a quiet pride. The act of giving, of being part of a community effort, had reminded her that she was capable, resilient, and still had the power to shape her own future. She looked at the families she had helped, at the gratitude in their eyes, and felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in months. The men she had helped remained quietly present. They watched from a distance, nodding occasionally, never intruding but always supporting. Their presence reminded her that human connections could be unconventional, unexpected, and yet deeply meaningful. They had risked nothing by showing kindness, yet their actions had created ripples in her life, changing the course of her story in ways she could not have imagined. As the sun began to set that evening, she and her son walked home, carrying small bags of leftover supplies from the drive. He skipped ahead, laughing, and she felt a lightness in her chest, a rare feeling of hope and possibility. For the first time in weeks, she felt that the future, though uncertain, held promise. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, do you think things will get better?" he asked softly. She kissed his forehead and smiled. "Yes, baby. Things are already getting better. We just have to keep moving forward, keep helping others when we can, and never give up." She left his room and sat quietly in the living room. reflecting on the past few weeks. She had lost her job, faced judgment, and been forced to navigate uncertainty. Yet she had gained something far more valuable: a network of support, an understanding of her own resilience, and a renewed sense of purpose. The kindness she had shown to strangers had come back to her in unexpected ways, reinforcing the lesson she had always tried to teach her son: courage and compassion could change lives. And so, as the city lights flickered on outside her window and the night settled over her small apartment, she felt a quiet determination grow within her. She would continue to search for work, to care for her son, and to act with courage and kindness no matter how risky it seemed. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew that with each small act, each connection, and each step forward, she was building a life that could withstand challenges and create hope, not just for herself, but for those around her. She leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day lift slightly. Life was still difficult, but she had learned that even in hardship, people could be good, could be unexpected allies, and that her actions, no matter how small, had the power to shape her world. And that knowledge, more than anything else, gave her strength. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly began to feel a little lighter, though the struggle never fully disappeared. She continued her volunteer work at the nonprofit, helping families who were struggling, and each day she learned something new, not just about them, but about herself. She discovered an inner strength she hadn't fully realized before. The sleepless nights, the long hours, the constant worry about bills, all of it had shaped her into someone resilient and resourceful. Her son noticed the changes too. He watched her move with purpose, saw her smile more often, and seemed to understand that their lives were slowly improving. "Mom," he said one morning as they walked to the park, "I think people like you make the world better." She smiled, touched by the honesty in his words. It reminded her why she had kept going, why she had risked so much to help strangers who needed food. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making life better for those around her, no matter how small the gesture. At the nonprofit, she began to take on more responsibilities. She helped organize food drives, set up donation collections, and even train new volunteers. Her experience as someone who had faced hardship firsthand made her relatable and effective. People trusted her because she understood their struggles in a way that went beyond theory. She was living proof that compassion could bridge gaps and transform lives. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A local journalist who had been following stories about everyday heroes in the community attended one of the food drives. She noticed her organizing donations, speaking kindly to families, and helping volunteers understand their tasks. After the event, the journalist approached her. "Excuse me," he said, notebook in hand. "I'm writing a story about people making a difference in the city. I'd love to talk to you about your work here." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to attention, especially not from the media. She hesitated, thinking of all the judgment she had faced after losing her job. But she realized that this could be an opportunity, not for fame, but to share her story and perhaps inspire others. She agreed to the interview, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. Over the next hour, she shared her experiences, the struggles of being a single mother, the challenges of losing her job, and the unexpected kindness she had received from people she had once feared. She spoke about her son, about the lessons she wanted him to learn, and about the small acts of compassion that had changed her life. The journalist listened intently, nodding and scribbling notes. When it was over, he thanked her and promised the story would highlight the positive impact she was making. A few days later, the article was published. Her story appeared in the local newspaper with a headline that read, "Single mother turns hardship into hope. Small acts of kindness transform lives." She read the words, her eyes welling up with tears. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt seen, not just as someone struggling, but as someone strong, compassionate, and capable of making a real difference. The response was immediate. People from the community reached out to her, offering support, connections, and even job opportunities. A small bakery offered her a part-time position, recognizing her dedication and people skills. Another nonprofit invited her to help organize larger community events, valuing her experience and insight. Slowly, doors that had seemed closed began to open one by one. Meanwhile, the men she had helped quietly continued to support her, They didn't make a scene or demand attention. They would check in occasionally, drop off groceries, or offer advice on navigating city resources. Their presence was subtle yet steady, a reminder that human kindness could come from the most unexpected sources. She had once feared them, judged them by their appearance, but she now saw them as individuals who, despite their rough exteriors and troubled pasts, were capable of compassion and respect. One evening, as she prepared dinner, she received a call from a woman at the nonprofit. "We have an opportunity for you," the woman said. "We're looking for someone to coordinate a new program for single parents. Your experience could make a huge difference. Are you interested?" Her heart raced. This was more than she had hoped for. She paused for a moment, thinking about all the obstacles she had faced, the long nights, the struggles, and the sacrifices. Then she smiled and said, "Yes, absolutely. I'd love to help." The new role was demanding, but it was fulfilling in ways she hadn't anticipated. She worked with single parents, helping them access resources, organize their schedules, and find stability. She shared her own experiences openly, offering guidance and encouragement. Parents listened, asked questions, and sometimes cried, relieved to know someone truly understood their challenges. For the first time, she felt that her struggles had a purpose beyond survival. She was making a real, tangible difference in the lives of others. Her son noticed the change in her as well. He saw her confidence growing, her steps lighter, her laughter more frequent. One afternoon, he hugged her tightly and said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, filled her heart with warmth. Everything she had endured, the fear, the judgment, the hardship, felt worth it in that moment. The article in the newspaper also had an unexpected effect. Neighbors and local business owners began reaching out, offering small jobs, volunteer opportunities, and assistance with household needs. Her life, once so isolated and difficult, was slowly becoming interconnected with a larger community. She was no longer alone in her struggles. She had allies, supporters, and people who believed in her and her ability to make a difference. Even the men she had helped became a part of that quiet network. They attended community events without drawing attention, sometimes offering assistance behind the scenes. Their presence reminded her that people were rarely only good or only bad. Everyone had the capacity to surprise you, to act with humanity when you least expected it. She had learned to look beyond appearances, to see the person behind the label society placed on them. One day, she was asked to speak at a small community gathering about her experiences. She stood before a group of people, some struggling as she had, others volunteering to help, and shared her story. She talked about fear, judgment, loss, and the unexpected kindness that had helped her rise above it all. Her voice was steady, her words sincere, and by the end, there was a wave of applause, not for her bravery alone, but for the message she conveyed, that compassion and courage could change lives. After the event, she returned home with her son, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The apartment no longer felt small or confining. It felt like a space of resilience, hope, and growth. She knew challenges would continue, that life would still bring hardships, but she also knew she had the tools, the support, and the courage to face whatever came next. The nonprofit role continued to grow, and with it, her confidence. She started mentoring other volunteers, sharing her experience with navigating difficult times while maintaining empathy and humanity. She became known in the community as someone who could connect, guide, and inspire. And all of this, she realized, had begun with a simple act: sharing a sandwich with people in need, showing kindness without expectation, and taking a risk when it felt dangerous to do so. Her son watched her transformation with awe. He saw that strength wasn't just about being tough or never showing fear. It was about acting with courage, showing kindness, and continuing to move forward even when life seemed unfair. He learned from her example that help could come from unexpected places, and that people were capable of surprising generosity, even if society told you otherwise. By now, she had settled into a rhythm. Her days were busy but rewarding, filled with meaningful work, small victories, and a growing sense of purpose. She still faced financial challenges, of course, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. The network of support she had built, volunteers, neighbors, the men she had helped, and her son, created a safety net that gave her confidence to dream beyond mere survival. And as she sat one quiet evening, watching the city lights twinkle outside her window, she reflected on how far she had come. She had faced judgment, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had persisted. She had risked ridicule and danger to help others, and in return she had found support, friendship, and opportunities she hadn't imagined possible. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. She knew the road ahead would continue to have obstacles, but she felt ready. With courage, compassion, and resilience, she could face whatever came next. And perhaps most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness given freely, without expectation, could change lives in ways you could never predict, including your own. Life had changed in ways she never imagined. From the fear and uncertainty of losing her job to the quiet support from people she had once feared, everything had led her to this point. She had a sense of stability returning, and her days were filled with purpose, meaning, and connection. But more than anything, she felt hope, a feeling that had been missing for far too long. Her mornings began as they always had, but now there was a sense of calm beneath the routine. She would wake before her son, make breakfast for both of them, and pack his lunch with care, smiling at the small act of giving. She no longer skipped her own meals as often, knowing that taking care of herself was just as important as taking care of him. It was a small but significant shift in her life, one that reminded her that self-care was part of resilience. The nonprofit role had grown into something larger than she expected. She was no longer just coordinating small programs. She was mentoring new volunteers, helping them understand the struggles of the families they served, and organizing larger events to bring communities together. Each day she met new people, single parents, struggling families, volunteers, and even local business owners who wanted to contribute. She felt a sense of belonging, something she hadn't felt in years. Her son often accompanied her to events, helping where he could, handing out food packages, and learning from her example. He was proud of her, and she could see in his eyes that he was absorbing lessons that went far beyond what any school could teach. He learned about compassion, perseverance, and the courage to act even when it was difficult. And in turn, he gave her motivation every day, a reminder that everything she did was for more than just herself. One afternoon, a representative from a larger city organization reached out to the nonprofit. They had read about her story in the newspaper and were impressed by her work and her approach. They wanted to offer her a leadership position, coordinating programs that would reach hundreds of families. The opportunity was both exciting and intimidating. It would mean more responsibility, longer hours, and stepping even further out of her comfort zone. She spent the evening considering the offer. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, but she also recognized the potential to make an even greater impact. She talked it over with her son, who listened quietly, nodding in understanding. "Mom, you can do this," he said simply, his words filled with innocent certainty. It was enough to give her courage. The next morning, she accepted the position, stepping into a role that would challenge her but also allow her to grow in ways she had never anticipated. The days that followed were busy and intense. She spent long hours coordinating programs, meeting families, and ensuring that resources reached those in need. Yet amidst the busyness, she never lost her compassion or attention to detail. Each interaction reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. She saw families relieved to receive support, children smiling with excitement at small surprises, and parents reassured by her guidance. Every small victory reinforced the belief that her efforts mattered. The men she had helped early on continued to be a quiet presence in her life. They never made demands, never drew attention to themselves, but they remained supportive in small, meaningful ways. Sometimes they helped with the logistics for events. Other times they offered advice or practical assistance. She had once feared them, judged them based on appearances, but she now saw them as allies, proof that humanity could be found in the most unexpected places. Their support reminded her that kindness had a ripple effect, touching lives in ways she could not always see immediately.